Hello, everybody. I'm Arezow Doost. Welcome to our KXAN Live. I've got Stratfor's Fred Burton here with me tonight. Fred, say hello.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We wanted Fred to be part of our conversation tonight because he was one of the panelists during a roundtable that we recently did. On Monday, we launched a major project that we've been working on for months called A History of Mass Violence. We go back 40 years and go to the communities impacted by mass violence. Our team, led by Josh Hinkle, Dave Barrera, and Ben Freeberg, they travel to these cities that have been impacted, talk to survivors, and they've put the pieces together, which you can binge watch essentially tonight, right now on the webpage, texasmassviolence.com. And Fred, as I mentioned, was one of the panelists. Fred, I wanted to ask you, since you were part of our roundtable, and given your expertise, walk us through a little bit of, what Stratfor does, what you do, and also at this point, what do you see in this issue?
Well, first, Stratfor is an Austin-based company, and we try to make sense of the world. We cover geopolitics, terrorism, economics. We look at the world, from our perspective and make sense of it for our subscribers and for our readers and for governments and multinational corporations.
And, this issue of mass violence, you were part of the roundtable discussion where we really took a deep dive into what's happening in our communities and really what's happening in Texas. Where do you see as far as how do we move forward?
Well, first, I think Texas is doing a wonderful job. I think what starts here really does filter out around the country. I think Governor Abbott and the Texas Department of Public Safety has done a great job with the Texas State Fusion Center and the iWatch program with the suspicious activity reports, trying to drive citizen reports of individuals that might be either predisposed towards this activity or harboring some sort of intent. But it really takes community involvement, and that's always been the difficult part, meaning that if there's someone out there that's either watching this on Facebook or hears this, and they know of an individual that is thinking about carrying out a mass casualty attack, you really could go to the iWatch program. You could do that in an anonymous capacity, or you could put your name there. I think it's critical that we engage the community to come forward with information on people that might be planning these kinds of attacks.
That's one of the things the governor has been really pushing, getting more awareness out there, reporting suspicious activity. But what are the hurdles when it comes to that?
Well, a lot of the hurdles center around individuals' just reluctance to report family members, or individuals that don't want to get involved, or individuals that don't really understand what could be defined as suspicious activity. Meaning, when you look at that, it's very hard to say, well, what is that? Is that someone staring at a school, taking unusual photographs, walking around locations like churches or mosques or synagogues? But if you look back and dissect some of our more recent attacks, what you'll see is that a lot of these folks leak their intent on social media. They'll go to Facebook Live, they'll post messages about their intents or their hate, and that gets back into those touchy kinds of issues of how do you define hate speech and the freedom of speech. So my advice would be that if you are aware of this kind of behavior, either on the internet or in social media, that you bring it forward and let the authorities, let law enforcement evaluate the circumstances and the person to see if there is a potential threat that's looming out there.
In the last few cases, that's been crucial.
It's very crucial. If you look at most terror plots that are thwarted in the continental United States, it's because individuals have come forward and reported something that doesn't look right. And this gets back to what is called a protective intelligence model, meaning you have to do a threat assessment on an individual that might be predisposed towards this kind of activity. But that's what our whole post-9/11 world is geared to in many ways. Let the analysts look at these individuals. Let's run the record checks. Let's see what kind of websites these people are visiting. Let's look to see how many firearms they might possess. Have they got a job? Have they stalked? What's their criminal behavior and so forth.
What is the threat now? You've been around the world, you've done this for decades. What is the threat we're facing now? How has it changed?
Well, first, I think social media and the 24/7 news cycle amplifies these events once they occur. You can't help yourself from reporting on these. I get it. That's your job. And if you go back to, like we were talking before this started, to the 60s and the 70s, our nation was on fire with domestic acts of violence and terror. My friend Brian Burrows wrote a great book called Days of Rage, which discusses just the scope and volume. I can't even imagine what Twitter would look like or Facebook if this was 1973 with just the scope of bombings and violence in the United States. So I think it's important for our viewers here and watching this to have a context of this from a historical perspective. But Texas, just due to its sheer size and geography, I mean, we have had a lot of problems.
And if you're just joining us now, we are having a conversation about a project that we just launched dealing with the history of mass violence in Texas. We go back 40 years and look at the cases that have impacted the state. We've talked to survivors. We've shared their stories with you. You can find it all here at texasmassviolence.com. You've got from, each chapter has one of the pieces that we've uncovered. And then also we go inside the issue with our expert panel, which Fred is a part of. And Fred, going back to your social media and online forums that you were speaking of, do we rely now on the companies to also play a big role in combating this problem?
I think so. I think that our social media platforms, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they're recognizing that we have a problem. You can't have individuals, live Facebook feeding attacks as they take place. And then if you look at some of the attacks that have taken place, how many people actually watch them? So, that's the kind of world that we're living in today. So there is that kind of responsibility upon our platforms to come forward. But also bear in mind that you do have federal authorities and state and local law enforcement that are out there scraping the web, looking into the dark web and looking at some of these posts to try to see, are there folks predisposed towards this kind of behavior? Are they associated with any right-wing or left-wing group? Are they engaged in white hate behavior or whatever? So, law enforcement does do their job, but it certainly helps when citizens come forward and report that information. And if you're not sure, report it. Let the authorities make the assessment. And trust me, in today's world of oversight, there's a lot of eyes on these kinds of reports, and they're very thoughtful when they go out and say, this is something that really doesn't reach a threshold to go out and talk to somebody, or maybe this is the kind of person that we do need to go knock on their door.
And also, if you're joining us now, please feel free to ask any questions. We want to share your questions with Fred. I was actually looking at some of the feedback we've already gotten on our series. And, when it comes down to it, it's people feel so heated about the gun issue. I want to be able to have the right to own a gun, do what I want with a gun. What are your thoughts, perspective on that?
Well, I think when you look at the acts of mass violence, certainly guns are involved. I think when you look at some of the, high-capacity magazines or those kinds of things that, from a common sense perspective, do you really need all the different kinds of high-capacity magazines? Maybe not, but I know there's a lot of gun folks out there that would totally disagree with me. I mean, I've been in the business for, over 30 years. I've carried pistols and revolvers as part of my job. It was a tool that you were issued with, and you were qualified to use it and so forth. But I've never wanted personally to go out and own a machine gun, for that matter, or an assault rifle. I just personally don't have that desire. But I know that, especially here in Texas, there's a lot of people that really want those kinds of weapons, and you want to be able to defend yourself and your family and your loved ones, and be licensed to carry a weapon to protect yourself and to come to the aid of others that might be in harm's way.
So is there a solution where you can have that and still be able to have a better control in process?
I think the gun issue is too polarizing in my assessment. Like we were talking before our Facebook Live here today, I think that our nation is so divided on this issue that it's the kind of issue that perhaps there is no solution. I know that probably won't make a lot of people happy that's watching this and might infuriate others, but the point is that I think that this is the kind of issue that people are either pro-gun or anti-gun, and there's really not a lot of common ground. That's been my experience.
But there are things that could be done.
I think so. I think there's some common sense things that can be done, certainly.
How about the mental health aspect of it?
Well, I think that's a big part. I was talking to several of my friends and analyst colleagues today at Stratfor, and when you look at these kinds of events, and I've seen a lot of tragedy in my life, whether it be terrorist attacks or acts of mass violence, and I personally believe it takes a special kind of crazy for an individual to want to walk into a school and start killing children. That to me, there's an aspect there that has a mental illness aspect. Now, I know from my days of working in the federal government, when you would have threats against cabinet level officials, threats against the president, the secretary of state, or whatever, and you would go out and interview these individuals. Most of them suffered from some degree of mental illness. Most of them, once you got them stabilized and had them evaluated and got on their proper medication, they were fine and they were functional. And then they would come off their medication, and then threats would increase, or in those days they would write letters to the White House, for example. So I personally believe there is a mental health element that's in there. I know others might disagree with that assessment, but whether it's a terrorist, a lone wolf, a lone shooter, everyone that I've ever talked to has some degree, in my judgment, of mental illness in play.
You actually spend a lot of time now talking to businesses about how to respond to these mass shootings.
Yes.
Walk us through what that looks like.
Well, I think this is like the elephant in the room. I'm sure here at KXAN, there's not a lot of support, or management really likes people thinking about this kind of problem every day, although I applaud you for what you've done with this. Most multinational corporations recognize that they have an anxious workforce, meaning I can't tell you the times I've talked to employees in multinational corporations, and they will tell you that they're fearful of an active shooter in the workplace, which is amplified and magnified by social media whenever one of those occur. So what I have seen, and it's really one of the more interesting trends in the business community, you see a lot of online videos and training. You see a lot of consultants that are being brought in to discuss what should you do in the event of an active shooter. And there has been a sea change with most of your Fortune 100s with actually providing that kind of advice and counsel to their employees. And in some cases, many multinationals make it mandatory training every year.
And, we're taking your questions here for Fred tonight. One of the questions that was posted by Ramona Benson, I think we can all agree that we need more mental health resources in our schools. Would love it if we could start there.
Yeah, I think Ramona has a very good suggestion. I think that when you look at that, these kinds of problems are resource problems. And it's also first recognizing that there is a problem, and then second having the money and the resources to put into that. But I would agree with her wholeheartedly along those lines.
We mentioned that we've talked to survivors and we're sharing their stories, and almost every case that, we heard, they felt like being prepared was the key. And you touched on that. I mean, that makes such a difference in our day-to-day lives, just being aware. You've talked to me about this before, just being aware of your surroundings. Let's just start there. But you do have to be more aware now.
You do. We talk about it a lot. We write a lot about it at Stratfor. It's called situational awareness, meaning how many people do you know that are totally unaware of their surroundings? You can, I have all your viewers walk out tomorrow and as they go to work and look at the people that have their head buried in their phone, walking down the street. They're stuck in traffic on Mopac and they're looking at their phone. They have no idea what's going around them. They have not made any kinds of plans to escape any kind of problem. And that's how you can help yourself, by being just generally aware and pay attention to what's happening in your surroundings. If you go to a movie theater, think about how you would get out of a movie theater in the event of a fire or an individual that opened up with a firearm. A lot of people don't think of basics. In the workplace, do you know how to get out of your workplace? Have you thought about a secondary way to get out of your workplace if the first way to get out, where you normally go, is blocked? And you would be amazed at the amount of people that don't even think about that and are just functioning in what we would call condition white back in our law enforcement days, that are just totally oblivious to their surroundings.
So you start there, you always have an exit plan.
You do.
And then, I mean, say something does happen. What do you do from that point on?
You immediately react, meaning you don't want to stay on what we call the X in the kill zone. If you hear a gunshot, move. Don't worry about your purse, your laptop, shutting down your computer. You want to get yourself away from that as quickly as you possibly can. And this gets back to that general awareness kind of perspective too. It's impossible to script all the different scenarios that could unfold in front of you. Meaning, it's hard to say, well, what do I do if a gunman walks in the front door? You can game board that in your mind, but you better have a plan for, in the event that that happens, what is it that you're actually going to do? And a lot of people game board and think through those kinds of scenarios. It's the same kind of training we used to get as agents, whether you're protecting the secretary or the president. You know, what are your scenarios? If you hear a gunshot, what do you do? How are you going to react? And it's amazing to me how that kind of training or just mental preparation to be able to react is so critical to just survival.
It means you're prepared.
You're thinking about it,
Yeah.
you're prepared, you're ready to move.
You know, when we were talking during the roundtable, one of the aspects that came up was the mental health aspects, which you touched on. But a very small percentage, we heard from NAMI Central Texas, they're involved in these mass shootings.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I know everybody has their opinion. It's been my experience, and most of the individuals I've ever talked to that's been involved in this or planning attacks, they have suffered some degree of mental illness, in my judgment. I'm not a qualified medical doctor by any stretch of the imagination, but I certainly talked to enough of these individuals to think there's just something not right with their thought process.
You know, we now have committees just in the last several months that are dissecting this, looking at it, looking for solutions. What will be the key that comes out of those?
Well, I think, first off, I think the state of Texas is doing a good job of putting together the committees and studying what could possibly be potential solutions. I think some of the things that have come out of this is technology solutions, better intelligence, better reporting, meaning the more people that watch these kinds of things and think about it, you at least get people noodling around in their head that they need to do something about something that doesn't look right. So the more public awareness of these kinds of problems are actually good, because it might cause someone to come forward and either self-admit that they have a problem, or it might cause a family member to report their brother or sister or a family member that might be planning this kind of event as well.
Fred, it really starts at home.
It does start at home. I mean, a lot of problems do start at home, but on this kind of issue, it really does. Now, in some of these cases, as you model them around the nation, you have individuals, families have been at their wits' end with an individual, or they've booted somebody out of the house, and they've kind of lost touch with them as well. But a lot of these incidents do start at home, and that's where they get access to a firearm. Mom or dad knows that the child has had problems for quite some time. They might be at their wits' end with how to deal with that individual. Maybe that person has been in and out of mental illness kind of assessments and so forth. So those are the more challenging kinds of cases.
What do you say to those, you know, that will come back and argue that, you know, as long as I'm protected, that's what I'm going to push for. The only way I can protect myself is by being armed. But in some of the cases that we've reported on, people didn't have guns when they fought off the attacker.
Well, I think, first off, it's your individual right. If you feel the need in our great nation to lawfully possess a firearm and to carry one and to be licensed and so forth, that's their right. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to carry a gun to be able to defend yourself. There's a lot of things you can use as a weapon. You know, you can carry a knife, you can carry a striking object, you can look at things such as chairs and books and other kinds of striking objects. If you know, you have to also be thinking of that kind of thing in that mindset to what could I use as a potential weapon. And again, if it boils down to, like you and I were on the panel, and John Cornett from the Alert Center there at Texas State, said it. I mean, if someone's trying to take your life, you have the right to defend yourself by any means necessary. And a lot of times, in some of these cases, that person is not expecting individuals to fight back. And we've seen that even in hijacking cases where, individuals, passengers will band together and take down an individual that's a problem on an airplane today. So, an overwhelming group of people can do a lot, but it just takes action and motion and kind of a plan and somebody to, step forward and say, let's go get this person.
It starts with each of us. But as a state, what else could we be doing?
Well, as a state, I think, again, we get back to the awareness programs, which I think is awesome. Again, I applaud the governor for what he's doing. There's going to be a lot of publicity around these events. I think there could be some technology solutions to this problem. It boils down to intelligence at times. You got to know about that individual that's planning that event. And that gets back to the community. And so that gets back to the DHS kind of motto, see something, say something. So if you know somebody's on the edge or thinking about this, someone really needs to report them.
Let's just go back to social media. In some of the profiles, we've seen people liking things that were posted. Nobody said anything.
It's pretty frightening, isn't
right.
it? Yeah, when you look at that on a social media platform. And that gets back to what you had said earlier about there is a degree of responsibility upon all these social media platforms and people that see that to report it. Meaning, look, this person has crossed a boundary here, or this person has made a threat. And I know that certain threats reach the threshold for not only for the state of Texas to investigate, but the federal authorities, like the Secret Service or the FBI, to step in.
When you're talking about reporting and being aware, so often people just want to mind their own business.
Right.
They don't want to get involved. But it's time to change that mentality, would you say?
Without a doubt. I mean, it boils down to family and neighborhood. Know your neighbors, know your area of responsibility, know your area of operation, know the areas where you work and live and travel. And you'll know if something doesn't look right in those areas where you frequent all the time.
You had shared a story with us just before we got started about a colleague who didn't board a plane. Could you share that?
Yeah, I mean, I've investigated several plane crashes and hijackings, and I had a colleague that chose not to get on a plane because it just didn't feel right. His gut in that plane eventually crashed, and it was bombed. And so my point on that is that at times you will sense unusual kind of events or behaviors, or something just doesn't look right. And when that kind of thing happens, you need to listen to your gut. Your body is telling you something, and you won't know it, but you'll just sense it. Something just doesn't look right. And when you study like surveillance video of attack indicators or even abducted children, you can watch and you can see the child before an abduction has actually taken place. That child recognizes that something's not right, but they kind of freeze. They don't move. They don't run away. So the point is that if you do see that kind of behavior, you need to do something. And it could be something as simple as turning around and going the other way. It could be something as simple as pulling out your phone and dialing 911 and say, something just doesn't look and see right, doesn't feel right at this moment in time.
My colleague Josh is asking, should there be more resources put into the state's fusion centers? They filter and vet suspicious activity reports, which could help prevent future attacks. He visited a fusion center in El Paso and got an inside look, which we've profiled in our series.
I think that the more analysts that specialize in what is called protective intelligence and can put together threat assessments of individuals that are predisposed towards this kind of behavior is a good thing. The problem at times with retention of analysts, because there's a lot of competition for talent and analysts, and the state of Texas will train analysts, and they might take another job with the federal authorities and so forth. So, but yes, resources are always good. More resources, specifically analysts that can evaluate these kinds of people, is a good thing.
Where do we get the money to do it?
Well, I think Texas is blessed with a lot of different resources, and I think that those can also be reallocated. There's always, grant monies that could be used or pulled for this. It's a specialized field. When you're doing threat assessments on individuals that threaten people, The Secret Service and the State Department, my old outfits, kind of lead the way with that kind of skill set because they've been interviewing people for years that are predisposed towards this activity. They're the letter writers, they're the emailers that will say, they'll make a threat against a cabinet level official or the president. So it's a nuanced kind of interview where you have to go in and really start talking to people, engage, what is their level of hate? Do they have access to firearms? Have they actually stalked a protectee? And so it's a different kind of mindset when you're interviewing people like this, and you have to be good at it, and you have to do a lot of it. Then you need the backroom help with dedicated intelligence analysts that can put together the picture of that individual, that can scrape all the social media, and can look at it and evaluate it and say, this person's visiting sites that are a little bit out there, or they're in the dark web, they're in chat rooms talking about killing people. Those are the kinds of things that you need analyst eyeballs on in a human kind of element there.
Fred, with so many agencies involved, do you feel like there's a disconnect?
But you raise a good point on that. I mean, I lived through that watching the growth of the joint terrorism task forces around the country, which actually have been a good thing. There were some growing pains, and there's been growing pains with the fusion centers. But if you think about the fusion center concept, that's where you put representatives of every agency that's a stakeholder, whether that's be in the state of Texas, you would have FBI, Texas Department of Public Safety, HSI, Austin Police Department, Williamson County, Round Rock. You put everybody, AISD, under one roof, and everybody can bring the strengths and weaknesses and leverage all those assets. I don't think it's a problem today. I think there's a challenge when it comes to subject matter expertise in this specific, unique kind of arena.
I wanted to go back to one other point you had made, and that was involving reporting. When you see something, report it, talk to the authorities. How do you make sure that you're not the one that is put in the spotlight and repercussions are made towards you when you become that kind of involved?
Well, I think that's part of the reason in our society today people don't want to get involved. They don't want to be that person that gets sued, for making this kind of complaint, or they don't want to be, reported that, well, your neighbor reported you, your behavior. But I think if you look at, the system, like, for example, we have in the state of Texas with the suspicious activity reports, you can choose to be anonymous, but you can report the incident. Or you can choose to be involved. And it's been my experience as a former cop and a former agent, if I go to interview you and you say, look, I really would like some confidentiality here, I don't want to be reported, that's protected. So, efforts can be made to protect you from coming forward. And for the most part, law enforcement does a real good job of doing that.
The takeaway tonight.
Well, the takeaway tonight is I think our nation has challenges. I think that this is trending in the wrong direction, that it's time that we continue to have these kinds of constant discussions, that people think about what we've kind of talked about tonight too, and if they know somebody that might be predisposed towards this kind of behavior, that they report them.
The red flags to look for.
Red flags to report to would be those individuals that have actually stated to someone or to a family member or on the internet that I'm thinking of killing someone, I'm predisposed towards doing this, making threats that are very overt. Those are the kinds of red flags. Get law enforcement involved to do a threat assessment of that kind of individual, and let the professionals make an opinion as to whether or not that person is capable and has the means and intent to do that.
Thank you, Fred, for being here tonight and having this discussion with us.
Thank you for having me.
And for you guys at home, I just want to mention that tonight at 10 o'clock, we're going to have the next part of our series on. And also, if we can show our webpage, if you go to texasmassviolence.com, you can watch all the pieces. You can go inside the map of the massacre for one of the stories that we've highlighted. You could go inside the issue where we talk to an expert, a panel of experts from mental health to Fred, who you just heard from, who talk about solutions that could possibly possibly tackle this problem that the state and really the country is facing. Thank you so much for joining us, so we'll sign off for now.